Raven 2, we're pinned down. East Ridge, 3 firing positions. No clean exit. Captain Mason Hale pressed his shoulder against the shattered wall as rounds struck the stone above him. Dust rained across his helmet. The abandoned village had become a maze of broken courtyards, narrow alleys, and blind corners. Every route out was covered. His 6-man ranger team had entered before sunrise. By noon, they were trapped. Falcon Actual, this is Raven 2, Hale said into the radio. We need immediate support. Only static answered. Across the courtyard, Sergeant Cole dragged a wounded ranger behind the remains of a burned transport. Another burst tore through the vehicle's metal frame, forcing both men flat. They've got the North Road, Cole shouted. And the ridge. Hale checked his magazine. Almost empty. Their medic was treating 2 men. Their radio operator had lost contact with command. The nearest extraction team was still miles away, and the enemy marksman above them had already stopped every attempt to reach higher ground. Private Owen Mercer crouched beside Hale, his face covered in dust. He was the youngest man on the team, 21 years old. First deployment. His hands shook around his rifle. We need a savior, he whispered. Hale looked at him, but said nothing. Men like them were not trained to wait for saviors. They were trained to become them. Then a single rifle shot rolled across the valley. The firing from the eastern ridge stopped. Every ranger froze. A second shot followed. The machine gun covering the North Road went silent. Hale turned toward the western slope. Through the drifting dust, a lone figure moved between the rocks above the village. Not a rescue squad. Not an armored column. One soldier. She wore a faded field uniform with no visible unit patch. A long sniper rifle rested across her shoulder. Her dark hair was pulled beneath a weathered cap, and she moved down the slope without hesitation, as if the rounds striking the valley belonged to another world. Mercer stared. Who was that? Hale raised his binoculars. The woman stopped behind a broken stone marker and lowered herself into position. Her movements were calm, exact. She adjusted the rifle, studied the ridge through her optic, then shifted the barrel by less than an inch. A third shot cracked through the air. Another firing position vanished into silence. Hale lowered the binoculars slowly. He had seen skilled marksmen before. This was different. She was not searching for targets. She already knew where they were. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and respect, hit like and subscribe. These stories inspire change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Elena Cruz. Staff Sergeant Elena Cruz had been ordered to remain at the observation post. She had ignored that order 12 minutes ago. From the ridge, she had watched the ranger team disappear into the village. She had seen the first ambush close behind them. She had heard their radio calls weaken beneath the static. Then she had packed her rifle and started walking. No backup, no escort, only a range card folded inside her pocket and the quiet certainty that 6 men below her were running out of time. A round struck the rock near her elbow. Elena did not flinch. She shifted her body 2 inches to the left, controlled her breathing, and found the next shadow moving behind a ruined window. Raven 2, she said into her radio. Hale heard a woman's voice break through the static. Keep your men down. I'm opening the south corridor. He looked toward the slope again. You're alone up there. A pause. Then her answer came, cold and steady. Not anymore. 3 hours earlier, Elena Cruz had been sitting alone at the far end of the forward operating base, cleaning dust from the bolt assembly of her rifle. The weapon rested across a scarred wooden table beneath a sheet metal awning. Beyond it, mechanics moved between vehicles, soldiers carried ammunition crates, and generators growled in the heat. Elena barely noticed any of it. Her attention stayed on the rifle. Every part had its place. Every movement had a reason. She worked slowly, not because she lacked speed, but because precision mattered more than performance. A careless inspection could turn a perfect shot into a fatal mistake. Across the yard, several rangers had just arrived from another sector. They were tired, loud, and carrying the confidence of men who had survived enough missions to believe they could judge anyone at a glance. Sergeant Cole noticed Elena first. That our overwatch? He asked. Captain Hale followed his gaze. Elena wore a plain field uniform, sun-faded at the shoulders. She was smaller than most of the soldiers around her, with a quiet posture that made her easy to overlook. A young ranger named Briggs laughed. You're kidding. Elena continued cleaning the rifle. Briggs stepped closer. No spotter, he asked. No team. She did not look up. Not today. He glanced at the rifle and smirked. You planning to carry that thing into the mountains by yourself? Elena fitted the bolt back into place. If I need to. A few of the men exchanged amused looks. Briggs leaned against the table. That rifle weighs nearly as much as you do. Only then did Elena raise her eyes. Her expression was calm, but something in it made Briggs straighten slightly. Then it's lucky I don't need your help carrying it, she said. Cole hid a smile. Briggs did not. Captain Hale stepped forward before the exchange could go further. Your staff, Sergeant Cruz? Yes, sir. Command says you'll observe our route from the western ridge. Elena gave a single nod. Hale studied her for a moment. He had read the short briefing attached to her transfer. Long-range reconnaissance. Precision support. Several deployments. Most of the important lines had been blacked out. He disliked incomplete files. He disliked unknown operators even more. How familiar are you with this valley, he asked. Elena glanced toward the mountains. Familiar enough to know the eastern approach is exposed after midday. Hale looked at the map in his hand. Their planned route entered from the east. That route was cleared yesterday. Yesterday's shadows were different. Briggs gave a quiet laugh. Hale ignored him. Elena pointed to a narrow line between the village and the ridge. Once the sun moves, anyone above this shelf can see straight into the southern alleys. If they want to trap you, that's where they'll do it. Hale looked down at the map again. The warning was specific. Too specific to dismiss. But the route had been approved by intelligence, and the team was already behind schedule. We'll maintain the plan, he said. You stay on the observation post and report movement. Elena held his gaze. If contact begins inside the village, you won't have time to wait for permission. That's why we have procedures. For the first time, something colder entered her expression. Procedures don't stop bullets, Captain. The nearby soldiers went quiet. Hale folded the map. Your position is the ridge. Do not leave it without direct authorization. Elena looked back down at her rifle. Yes, sir. Briggs grinned as the Rangers walked away. Guess the little sniper got put back in her place. Elena said nothing. She finished assembling the rifle, checked the optic, and watched the team disappear toward the eastern road. Then she looked at the sky. The sun had already begun to shift. By the time the first gunfire echoed through the valley, Elena was lying behind her scope on the western ridge. She counted muzzle flashes, marked escape routes, listened to the Ranger channel collapse into static and shouting. Then Captain Hale's voice broke through. We're pinned down. Elena closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, the decision had already been made. She folded the bipod, lifted the rifle, and left the observation post behind. The first sign that something was wrong came when the village went silent. Captain Hale noticed it as his team entered the southern alley. No children watching from doorways. No animals moving between the stone houses. No cooking smoke rising from the rooftops. Only wind pushing dust across the road. Sergeant Cole slowed beside him. Too quiet. Hale raised a closed fist. The Rangers stopped. Private Mercer scanned the upper windows while Briggs watched the eastern ridge. The village looked abandoned, but Hale had spent enough years in combat to know that empty streets could be more dangerous than crowded ones. He touched his radio. Raven 2 to Overwatch. Cruz, report. Static. He tried again. Elena, do you have movement? Her voice came back faintly. Possible heat signatures north of your position. Stay out of the central courtyard. Briggs glanced at Hale. Possible. Hale ignored him. Can you confirm? A pause followed. Then Elena answered. Not from this angle. Cole pointed toward a narrow passage between two buildings. We can bypass the courtyard through there. Hale studied the route. It was tight, but it offered cover. Move. The team entered one at a time. Mercer went first, followed by Cole and the medic. Hale stayed near the center. Briggs and the radio operator covered the rear. Halfway through the passage, a metal can rolled from a doorway and struck the wall. Mercer turned toward the sound. The first burst came from above. Rounds tore into the stone, sending fragments across the alley. The Rangers dropped instantly. Contact. A second firing position opened from the eastern roofline. Then a third. The passage became a corridor of dust, noise, and flying debris. Hale fired toward the nearest window. Back out. Back out. But when Briggs looked behind them, armed men had already appeared at the entrance. They closed the rear. Cole grabbed Mercer by the vest and pulled him behind a low wall as rounds struck the ground where he had been kneeling. The medic shouted, "Man down!" The radio operator collapsed near the corner, clutching his side. Hale crawled toward him and dragged him behind cover. "Where are they coming from?" "Everywhere," Cole replied. That was when Hale understood. The silence had not meant the village was empty. It meant the enemy had been waiting. He pressed the radio again. "Crews, we're in contact. Multiple positions. We need eyes now." Elena's response came immediately. "I warned you about the courtyard." "This isn't the courtyard." "No," she said. "It's the trap leading to it." A round struck the wall beside Hale's head. He lowered himself. "Can you engage?" "Negative. Buildings are blocking my line." Briggs fired 2 controlled bursts toward the roof. "So much for our sniper." Cole shot him a hard look. "She can't shoot through stone." Another burst forced them lower. Hale checked the wounded radio operator. The bleeding was heavy, but he was conscious. The medic began, working while Mercer returned fire with trembling hands. "We need to reach the southern buildings," Hale said. "Once we cross the courtyard, we can break west." Cole looked over the wall. The open ground between them and the next structure was less than 30 yards. It might as well have been a mile. A machine gun waited at the far end. "No one makes that crossing," Cole said. Hale searched for another option. There wasn't one. Then Elena's voice cut through the radio. "Captain, I need you to mark the machine gun position." Hale looked toward the ridge, though he could not see her. "You said you had no line." "I don't." "Then why mark it?" "Because I'm changing positions." Hale's jaw tightened. "You were ordered to remain at the observation post." "I remember." "What are you doing, Sergeant?" For several seconds, only gunfire answered him. Then Elena spoke again. "Fixing your route." On the western ridge, she rose from behind the rocks and began moving downhill. The safe position disappeared behind her. Ahead waited a village full of hidden shooters, narrow streets, and men who had already prepared for anyone trying to enter. Elena tightened the sling around her shoulder. Then she stepped off the ridge and walked toward the war zone. Elena reached the first ruined house just as the machine gun opened again. The burst tore across the southern courtyard, chewing through a wooden door and forcing Hale's team deeper behind cover. Dust rolled through the alley like smoke. She pressed her back against the outer wall and listened. 3-round bursts from the eastern roof. Longer fire from the north road. A single rifle cracking from somewhere above the courtyard. The enemy sniper. Elena closed her eyes for half a second. Not to rest. To separate the sounds. The battle became a pattern in her mind. Distance. Direction. Timing. She could hear when the machine gunner changed position. She could tell which rifle belonged to the marksman and which shots came from frightened men firing without aim. She lowered her rifle and checked the alley ahead. 20 yards to the next wall. No cover between. "Raven 2, she said quietly. "I'm entering from the west." Hale's answer came. Sharp. "Negative. Hold your position." Elena watched a shadow cross the broken window above her. She fired once. The shadow disappeared. "I'm already inside." For a moment, Hale said nothing. Then another burst struck near his team. "We need that machine gun down." "I know." Elena moved. She crossed the alley low and fast, boots sliding through loose stone. A round struck the ground behind her. Another hit the wall at shoulder height. She reached the next building and dropped behind a collapsed stairway. From there, she could finally see part of the courtyard. Hale's Rangers were trapped behind 2 broken walls and a burned vehicle. The wounded radio operator lay beside the medic. Mercer was firing toward the rooftops, but his shots were too high. Briggs crouched near the rear, searching for targets he could not find. The machine gun position was hidden behind a stack of stone blocks on the far side. Elena could see the barrel. Nothing else. She adjusted the optic. Waited. The weapon fired again. Muzzle rise. Slight movement behind the stones. There. She squeezed the trigger. The machine gun stopped in the middle of its burst. Cole looked toward the western buildings. That was her. Briggs stared at the silent position. Lucky shot. Hill did not answer. He had watched the exact moment the barrel shifted. He had seen how little of the shooter had been exposed. Luck had nothing to do with it. Elena changed position immediately. The enemy sniper fired at the window she had just left. The round punched through the wall and sent fragments across the floor. She crawled beneath the sill. He had found her. That meant she was close to finding him. "Captain," she said, "your sniper is on the northeast roofline, higher than the others. Can you take him?" "Not yet." A second rifle shot struck the burned vehicle near Cole. Elena studied the angle. The enemy marksman was disciplined. He fired once, then moved. No repeated window. No obvious muzzle flash. He knew how to survive. So did she. Hale glanced at Mercer, who was pressed against the wall beside him. How much ammunition? 2 magazines. Cole checked his own. Less. The medic looked up from the wounded operator. We need to move him now. Hale looked across the courtyard. The machine gun was silent, but the open ground was still covered by riflemen on both sides. Elena, we need a route. She shifted into a narrow room with half the roof missing. I can give you 20 seconds. That's not enough. It's what you have. Briggs grabbed the radio. You expect us to trust one shooter? Elena recognized his voice. The man from the maintenance table. Her expression did not change. No, she said. I expect you to follow your captain. Hale took the radio back. What happens after 20 seconds? Elena raised her rifle toward the roofline. Anyone still standing becomes a target. She fired. A shooter fell away from the southern window. She worked the bolt and shifted left. Second shot. Another rifle went silent. Third shot. A figure disappeared from the eastern roof. Hale rose slightly and looked across the courtyard. For the first time since the ambush began, the enemy fire weakened. Elena's voice came through the radio. Move now. Cole lifted the wounded operator. Mercer and Briggs moved to cover them. Hale stepped into the open first. The Rangers crossed the courtyard as Elena continued firing from the ruins. Each shot arrived before the danger fully revealed itself. A rifle barrel appeared. A shot answered. A man leaned from a rooftop. He dropped back out of sight. The 20 seconds stretched longer than anyone expected. Then the enemy sniper fired again. The round passed inches from Elena's face and struck the wall behind her. She froze. Not from fear. From recognition. That shot had come from a different angle. He had moved closer. Elena lowered her rifle and turned toward the narrow stairway behind her. A faint shadow crossed the doorway below. The sniper was no longer hunting the Rangers. He was hunting her. The shadow stopped at the bottom of the stairway. Elena remained perfectly still. Dust drifted through the broken ceiling. Somewhere outside, Hale's team moved deeper into the southern buildings. Their boots scraped across stone, but the sound was nearly lost beneath scattered rifle fire. The man below took one slow step upward. Elena rested her finger beside the trigger. Her rifle was built for distance, not narrow rooms. The barrel was too long to turn quickly, and the stairway gave her almost no room to move. She could retreat through the missing wall behind her, but that would expose her to the eastern roofs. The sniper climbed another step. Elena watched the shadow stretch across the floor. He was careful. No heavy breathing. No rushed movement. No unnecessary noise. Professional. Cruz. Hale's voice whispered through her radio. Status. She did not answer. The shadow moved again. Elena lowered the rifle quietly and reached for the sidearm at her hip. A piece of stone shifted beneath her boot. The sound was small. It was enough. The enemy sniper rushed the stairs. Elena fired through the wooden railing. The shot struck the wall beside him, forcing him back. He answered instantly. A round tore through the floor where Elena had been kneeling. She rolled behind a stone column and drew her pistol. The man came through the doorway with a compact rifle raised. Elena fired twice. He twisted away, and one round struck his shoulder. Instead of falling, he drove forward and slammed the rifle into her arm. Her pistol skidded across the floor. He grabbed the barrel of her sniper rifle and pulled. Elena released it before he could use the sling against her. For 1 second, surprise crossed his face. She stepped inside his reach. Her elbow struck his wounded shoulder. His grip weakened. She drove her palm into the rifle's receiver, forcing the weapon aside as he fired. The round went through the ceiling. He swung at her. Elena ducked and drove him against the wall. Stone cracked beneath the impact. The sniper reached for a knife on his vest. She trapped his wrist. They stood inches apart, locked in silence, each waiting for the other to lose balance. He was heavier, stronger, but Elena felt the shift in his weight before he moved. She turned, pulled his arm across her shoulder, and used his momentum to throw him down the stairway. He struck the steps hard and disappeared below. Elena retrieved her pistol and approached the railing. The sniper lay at the bottom, trying to reach his rifle with his uninjured arm. Don't, she said. He looked up at her. There was no fear in his expression, only recognition. You're the woman from Kandar, he said in accented English. Elena's eyes narrowed. The name had not been spoken to her in years. Kandar was classified. The sniper gave a weak smile. Not to the men who survived it. Hale's voice returned through the radio. Elena, answer me. She kept the pistol trained on the man. I'm here. We reached the southern buildings. But the road ahead is blocked. Elena glanced through the ruined window. Beyond the village, 3 vehicles were moving into position along the escape route. Armed fighters spilled from the rear, spreading across the road. The Rangers had escaped one trap only to enter another. How many? She asked. At least 20. Elena looked down at the wounded sniper. He smiled again. You came to save them, he said. Now you die with them. She retrieved her rifle and checked the chamber. Outside, engines grew louder. Elena stepped over the fallen man and moved toward the window. No, she said calmly. Then she raised the rifle. They came into my range. The first vehicle stopped at the southern road. 2 more spread out behind it, forming a wall of steel across the Rangers' escape route. Armed men moved into the ruins on both sides, taking positions behind doors, windows, and broken walls. Captain Hale saw them through a gap in the stone. They're cutting us off. Cole lowered the wounded radio operator behind a pile of rubble. How long until support arrives? Hale checked the damaged radio. No signal. Mercer looked toward the road. The fear had returned to his face. We can't fight through that. Briggs reloaded his last magazine. No, he said. We can't. Elena heard every word through her headset. From the second floor of the ruined house, she had a narrow view over the southern approach. The road curved between 2 stone walls before opening toward the valley. A perfect choke point. For both sides. She studied the vehicles. The first carried a heavy weapon mounted above the cab. The second was loaded with fighters. The third remained farther back, partially concealed behind a low ridge. Command vehicle, she thought. She adjusted the rifle and searched the windows. Captain, she said, get your team below street level. Hale looked toward the upper floor. What are you planning? I'm changing the shape of the battlefield. That road is full of civilians' buildings. They're empty. You sure? I watched the evacuation before your team entered. Hale paused. Another detail intelligence had missed. Everyone down, he ordered. The Rangers moved into the lower room as Elena aimed at the first vehicle. Not at the gunner. Not at the driver. At the front tire. She fired. The tire exploded, and the vehicle lurched sideways, blocking half the road. Before the fighters understood what had happened, Elena fired again. The second vehicle's front wheel collapsed. It struck the first truck and turned across the remaining gap. The escape route was now sealed. But so was the enemy's advance. Cole stared through the opening. She trapped them. Hale understood a second later. The men behind the vehicles could no longer move forward without climbing into the open. The fighters already inside the village had lost their reinforcement route. Elena had divided them. She moved her scope toward the heavy weapon. The gunner was ducking behind the shield, searching the rooftops. She waited for him to rise. One breath. Half released. The rifle cracked. The gunner disappeared from view. Enemy fire erupted toward her building. Bullets struck the walls and roof. Wood splintered above her. Elena crawled backward, lifted the rifle, and moved toward the far room. The wounded sniper at the bottom of the stairs laughed weakly. They know where you are now. Elena stopped beside the doorway. They knew before. She crossed into the next room as a burst tore through the wall behind her. Hale's voice came over the radio. We still have at least 12 inside the village. 4 on the eastern roofs, Elena replied. 3 near your old position. 5 moving through the north alley. Briggs looked at Hale. How can she see all that? Cole answered quietly. She's been counting. Elena reached a window overlooking the north side. 2 fighters moved below her. She fired once. The first fell behind the wall. The second turned and ran. She shifted the rifle, but did not shoot. He disappeared into an alley. A moment later, 3 more men followed him away from the southern road. Exactly where she wanted them. Captain, when I give the word, move west. Hale studied the narrow passage behind them. That takes us back toward the ridge. It takes you to higher ground. And you? Elena glanced at the vehicles. The third truck had begun reversing behind the ridge. The command vehicle was leaving. I have one more target. Hale's voice hardened. We move together. That's not possible. You disobeyed 1 order already. Don't make it 2. Elena almost smiled. Even trapped and low on ammunition, Hale was still trying to command the situation. Then her scope found a man stepping from the third vehicle. He wore no visible rank, but every fighter around him turned when he raised his hand. The leader. Elena adjusted for distance. Wind pushed dust across the road. The man looked toward the village and pointed at Hale's position. More fighters began moving. Elena settled behind the rifle. "Captain," she said, "you wanted to know what happens after 20 seconds. Hale pressed the radio closer. "I remember." Her finger touched the trigger. "This is what happens next." The shot crossed the valley. The enemy leader fell beside the vehicle. For 1 second, the entire southern road went still. Then the fighters broke formation. Some ran toward the truck. Others shouted conflicting orders. The attack lost its shape. Elena watched the confusion spread. "Move west," she ordered. This time, no ranger questioned her. They lifted the wounded, left their cover, and followed the corridor she had created through the war zone. The western passage was barely wide enough for one man at a time. Captain Hale entered first, rifle raised, scanning the broken doorways ahead. Cole followed with the wounded radio operator across his shoulders. Mercer stayed close behind, helping the medic keep pressure on the bleeding. Briggs covered the rear. For the first time since the ambush began, no one spoke. They moved because Elena had told them to move. Behind them, confusion spread across the southern road. The enemy leader was down. The vehicles blocked one another. Fighters shouted over conflicting orders while others fired blindly toward the rooftops. The Rangers had less than a minute before someone restored control. Elena knew it. She watched them from the upper floor until the last man disappeared into the passage. Then she turned back toward the stairs. The wounded sniper was gone. A dark smear marked the stones where he had been lying. His rifle remained near the wall, but the side door stood open. Elena lowered her weapon. He had not gone far. Men with injuries like his did not run. They waited. She stepped down carefully. The building creaked around her. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight. Somewhere below, a loose metal sheet tapped against the wall in the wind. Once, twice, then silence. Elena reached the bottom of the stairs. The knife came from her left. She shifted just before the blade reached her side. It cut through the fabric near her ribs, but missed the body armor beneath. The sniper drove into her, using the last of his strength to push her against the wall. Her rifle struck the floor. "You should have killed me," he said. Elena trapped his knife hand between them. "You should have stayed down." He forced the blade closer. His wounded shoulder trembled, but hatred kept him upright. "You think saving 6 men changes anything?" No, Elena twisted his wrist. The knife fell. She drove her knee into his leg, turned, and pinned him against the wall. He reached for her pistol. She caught his hand first. For a moment, neither moved. Then the sniper looked past her. Elena followed his eyes. A fighter stood in the doorway with a rifle aimed at her back. The wounded sniper smiled. The rifle fired. Elena dropped instantly. The round passed over her shoulder and struck the sniper in the chest. His body absorbed the impact and fell against the wall. Elena rolled, recovered her rifle from the floor, and fired once. The fighter collapsed in the doorway. Silence returned. Elena remained low, listening for movement. Nothing. She rose and checked the cut near her ribs. No serious wound. Her radio crackled. "Hail to cruise. We've reached the western shelf." Elena stepped outside. From the ridge above, she could see the Rangers climbing toward higher ground. But enemy fighters had entered the lower end of the passage behind them. 6 men, closing fast. "You have pursuit," she said. Hale turned and saw movement below. "We can hold the shelf." "No, they'll surround you again. We're not leaving you down there." Elena looked toward the nearest route uphill. The distance was too great. She would never reach Hale's team before the pursuers did. A narrow tower stood between the passage and the western slope. Its upper platform overlooked the entire approach, but reaching it meant crossing an exposed street. Elena checked her remaining ammunition. 5 rounds. "Captain, keep climbing." Hale's answer came immediately. "Negative. That wasn't a suggestion. You're 1 soldier against 6. Elena watched the fighters move between the buildings. Then they brought 4 too many. She left cover and ran. Rounds struck the street behind her. One clipped the edge of her pack. Another shattered a window beside her face. She reached the tower, climbed the broken steps, and dropped behind the stone railing. The pursuers entered the passage below. Elena placed the rifle against her shoulder. First shot. The lead fighter fell. The others scattered. Second shot. A man behind a doorway dropped out of sight. Third shot. Another collapsed while trying to climb the wall. Hale watched from the ridge. She's holding the entire passage alone, Mercer whispered. Briggs stared down at the woman he had laughed at that morning. No one looked smaller now. The remaining fighters fired toward the tower. Stone fragments struck Elena's cheek. Blood traced a thin line beneath her eye. She ignored it. Fourth shot. Silence from the left side. One round remained. The final fighter disappeared behind the buildings. Elena searched every doorway. Nothing moved. Then Hale saw a figure climbing the rear of the tower, hidden from her view. Elena, behind you. She turned. Too late. The fighter reached the platform and charged. Elena swung the rifle aside as he collided with her. Both crashed into the railing. The last round discharged into the sky. Her rifle fell into the street below. The man pulled her toward the broken edge. Elena planted one boot against the stone and struck his throat with her forearm. His grip loosened. She turned, drove him into the railing, and used his momentum against him. He fell back onto the platform and did not rise. Elena stood alone above the passage, breathing hard. On the ridge, every ranger was watching. Hale raised the radio. Crews, move. That's an order. Elena looked toward them, then toward the southern road, where more enemy vehicles were appearing through the dust. She retrieved the fallen fighter's rifle. I'm coming, she said. And for the first time that day, she began moving away from the war zone instead of deeper into it. Elena descended the western slope with the captured rifle across her chest. Behind her, the village was disappearing beneath dust and smoke. The sound of gunfire had changed. It was no longer coordinated, no longer controlled. The enemy had lost its leader, its advance route, and the high ground. But the Rangers were not safe yet. Captain Hale's team had reached a rocky shelf above the valley. Cole lowered the wounded radio operator behind a stone ledge while the medic checked his pulse. He's fading, the medic said. We need evacuation now. Hale looked at the dead radio, then at Elena. She reached them seconds later, breathing hard but steady. Blood marked her cheek, and a tear in her uniform exposed the edge of her body armor. Briggs stared at her. Only hours earlier, he had mocked the rifle in her hands. Now that rifle was gone, left somewhere in the street below, and she had returned carrying an enemy weapon with 2 Rangers still alive because of her. Hale stepped toward her. You disobeyed a direct order. Elena looked past him at the wounded man. Yes, sir. You left your observation post. Yes, sir. You entered a kill zone alone. Yes, sir. Cole glanced between them. Mercer lowered his eyes. No one knew whether Hale was about to thank her or place her under arrest. Elena removed the radio from her vest and knelt beside the wounded operator. This unit still has a short-range emergency beacon, she said. The medic looked up. It was damaged. The main transmitter was. She opened the casing with the tip of a knife, pulled 2 wires free, and connected them to a small power cell from her own gear. A faint light appeared. Hale watched in silence. You know communications repair too? I know what keeps people alive. She adjusted the frequency. This is Raven support to any aircraft on emergency channel. 6 friendly personnel on Western Ridge. Multiple wounded. Immediate extraction required. Static answered. Then a distant voice broke through. Raven support, identify. Elena looked at Hale. He gave a short nod. She transmitted their coordinates. Extraction window is 4 minutes, the pilot replied. Mark your position. Cole looked toward the village. We don't have 4 minutes. More fighters were moving along the lower road. Without their leader, they were disorganized, but anger had given them direction. They were climbing toward the ridge. Elena handed the beacon to Mercer. Keep transmitting. She checked the captured rifle. Half a magazine. Briggs stepped beside her. I'll cover the left. Elena looked at him. There was no arrogance in his face now. Only shame. I was wrong about you, he said. This isn't the time. I know. He tightened his grip on his rifle. That's why I'm saying it now. Elena studied him for 1 second. Hold your fire until you see their shoulders. Briggs nodded. Yes, Sergeant. The Rangers formed a defensive line along the shelf. Cole took the right side. Hale remained near the wounded. Mercer held the beacon high while the medic continued working. The first enemy fighter appeared between the rocks below. Elena fired. He dropped behind cover. A second moved left. Briggs waited. Elena's earlier instruction echoed in his mind. Not the head. Not the rifle. The shoulder. When it appeared, he fired. The fighter fell back. Elena glanced at him. Good. One word. It meant more to Briggs than any praise he had received in training. The next attack came from both sides. Rounds struck the shelf. Stone chips cut across Hale's hands. Cole changed magazines while shouting target positions. Elena moved between them, calling distances and angles. 2 left. High rock. Wait. Now. The Rangers fired together. Not like trapped men. Like a team again. Then the sound of rotor blades reached the ridge. Mercer looked toward the sky. Helicopter. The extraction aircraft came low over the western mountains, banking hard toward their position. Its door gunner opened fire across the lower slope, forcing the remaining attackers back into cover. Smoke filled the shelf as the helicopter landed. Cole and the medic carried the wounded operator aboard first. Mercer followed. Briggs stayed at the door, covering Elena. She was still firing toward the rocks below. Elena! Hale shouted. Move! She backed toward the aircraft without turning away from the threat. Briggs reached for her arm. A round struck the ground between them. Elena pushed him into the helicopter and climbed aboard after him. Hale entered last. The aircraft lifted from the ridge as the village dropped away beneath them. For several seconds, no one spoke. Only the engines, the wind, and the medic's quiet instructions filled the cabin. Then the wounded radio operator opened his eyes. Did we make it? He asked weakly. Cole looked across the cabin at Elena. She sat against the wall, blood drying beneath one eye, hands resting around the captured rifle. Yeah, Cole said. His voice was low. We made it. Mercer watched her. Hours earlier, he had whispered that they needed a savior. Now he understood the truth. Saviors did not always arrive with aircraft, medals, or an army behind them. Sometimes they walked alone into the gunfire and brought everyone else home. The helicopter landed at the forward operating base just before sunset. Medical personnel were already waiting on the pad. The moment the doors opened, they rushed forward with stretchers and equipment. Cole helped guide the wounded radio operator into their hands while the medic shouted the details of his condition over the noise of the rotors. Mercer climbed out next. Then Briggs. Neither man spoke. Captain Hale stepped onto the concrete and turned back toward the cabin. Elena remained seated for one more second. The captured rifle rested across her knees. Dust covered her uniform. Blood had dried along her cheek, and one sleeve was torn from shoulder to elbow. She looked less like a legend than anyone Hale had ever seen. She looked tired, human, and completely unwilling to admit either. Elena, Hale called. She stood and stepped down from the aircraft. Across the landing area, soldiers had begun gathering. Word of the ambush had reached the base before they did. Some had heard that Raven 2 was trapped. Others had heard that a lone sniper had crossed the valley and broken the attack apart. Most assumed the story had been exaggerated. Then they saw the Rangers. They saw Cole supporting Mercer. They saw the blood on Briggs's uniform. And they saw every member of the team turn toward Elena before walking away. Briggs stopped in front of her. That morning, he had leaned against her table and laughed at the size of her rifle. Now he stood at attention. I owe you an apology, Sergeant. Elena removed the magazine from the captured weapon and checked the chamber. You owe your team better judgment. Briggs swallowed. Yes, Sergeant. And the next person you underestimate may not get the chance to save you. His face tightened with shame, but he did not look away. No excuse. Elena handed the empty rifle to an armorer. Good. She walked toward the medical building. Hale followed. You should be examined. I'm fine. You were nearly cut, shot at, and thrown off a tower. Still fine. That is not a medical assessment. Elena stopped. The evening light cast long shadows across the base. Mechanics paused near the vehicle bay. Soldiers watched from the walkways. No one laughed now. Hale lowered his voice. You knew the eastern route was compromised. I suspected it. You counted the positions before we entered. I counted possibilities. And when we ignored your warning, you came anyway. Elena looked toward the hospital doors, where the wounded operator had disappeared. You had men down. That wasn't your assignment. No, then why did you do it? For the first time that day, Elena seemed uncertain how to answer. Not because she lacked one. Because the answer felt too obvious to explain. They were ours, she said. Hale studied her. No speech. No demand. For recognition. No mention of the order she had broken or the lives she had saved. Just 3 words. They were ours. The base commander approached from across the pad with 2 senior officers behind him. He carried a classified personnel folder. Staff Sergeant Cruz. Elena faced him. Sir. He looked at Hale's team, then back at her. I've received the preliminary report. It will be incomplete. I assumed so. The commander opened the folder. Inside were deployment records, commendations, and pages blacked out almost entirely. Near the back was a photograph of Elena beside a mountain unit years earlier. Below it, a line remained visible. Kandar Valley. Long-range interdiction. 12 personnel recovered. Hale read it over the commander's shoulder. The wounded sniper's words returned to him. You're the woman from Kandar. The commander closed the file. Captain Hale, do you know why Sergeant Cruz was assigned to your sector? Hale looked at Elena. No, sir. Because 6 years ago, another team was trapped in terrain almost identical to that village. The commander paused. She was the only member of the Overwatch element who reached them. Briggs stared at her. Mercer did too. The story they had lived that afternoon was not her first. It was simply the first one they had witnessed. The commander turned to Elena. You violated a direct order. Yes, sir. You abandoned your assigned post. Yes, sir. And according to this report, you prevented the loss of an entire Ranger team. Elena remained still. The commander extended his hand. She looked at it for a moment before accepting. Around them, the landing area had fallen silent. Then Captain Hale stepped back and raised his hand in salute. Cole followed. Mercer straightened despite the pain in his shoulder. Briggs was next. One by one, every Ranger from Raven 2 saluted the woman they had doubted. Elena returned the salute. Nothing in her expression changed. But when she lowered her hand, the coldness in her eyes had softened. The next morning, she returned to the same wooden table beneath the metal awning. Her rifle had been recovered from the village overnight. She placed it across the scarred surface and began cleaning dust from the action. Briggs passed nearby with 2 younger Rangers. He stopped them before they could speak too loudly. That's Staff Sergeant Cruz, he said. One of them glanced at her small frame and the long rifle on the table. What unit is she with? Briggs looked at Elena, then toward the mountains beyond the base. The unit that comes when everyone else runs out of options. Elena heard him. She gave no reaction. She simply continued working, each component arranged with the same quiet precision as before. She had not asked them to respect her. She had not demanded that they believe in her. She had walked into the war zone when 6 soldiers needed help, and she had brought them home. Because respect is not earned through rank, appearance, or loud words. It is earned in the moment when fear tells everyone to step back, and one person steps forward.